This is Individualist Origins, a podcast where I interview various individuals about relevant topics and about their origins. Just a quick disclaimer, the views and opinions expressed by me in this video are solely those of the author and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other individual, organization, group, or company. All content is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as professional advice. Thank you. Hello, Dr. Edelstein. First, I'd like to ask you who you are and what your professional history is and what you currently do.
Okay, I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein. I'm a clinical psychologist and author. I've written 5 books. I have a Psychology Today blog, and I do weekly podcasts. And it's all related to the type of therapy I do, and that's called Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, REBT. And Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy was devised by a brilliant psychologist in the 1950s, Albert Ellis, and that's when most therapists did psychoanalytic Freudian therapy. And the assumption there was the reason we have emotional problems as adults was because our childhood, abusive childhood or critical childhood, those kinds of things. And that was their explanation. But actually, the truth is that Albert Ellis has popularized is that our emotions or emotional problems, both, don't come from situations like how we were treated as children, but they come from our thinking about situations. So, for example, if you're fired from a job and you feel depressed about that, most people would say, I'm depressed because I'm out of work.
Yeah.
But that's not how we work psychologically. The way we work is it's always our thinking about that. It's awful I was fired. I can't stand it. This proves I'm a loser. But you could be fired from your job and have different thinking and not feel depressed. You could think, isn't this great? I've been wanting to quit. I didn't know how. Now I can take that vacation I've been looking for.
Yeah.
Or now I can look for other fields because I wasn't excited about this. It got boring, things like that. So it's clear that it's your thinking about situations, not the situations themselves, that cause our emotions. Yes.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my first question is how then did you relate the rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT, into the 3-minute therapy? Because clearly it's about the emotional consequences of your thought process, right? How you think determines how you approach a situation and how you feel by going into something. I mean, this in my personal life is very important because I love hard exercise and I love feeling that pain the next day, the aching joints, muscle pain. And for me, I love that pain. I love that pain, right? Because I associated very clearly that pain means I've made the results I want, right? Or if you really gassed after a good run and you feel this really low dip, you know through experience that you're going to feel better. You know that you're making results and that you're going to have a good drink of water. So you're not getting depressed about the pain, about the torment you're going through because you've practiced this, you've reinforced it over the years going forth.
And also, you're not procrastinating about doing the exercises because you know it's good for you. You know you feel good afterward. You'll be happy you have done it. Where other people, I work with clients who procrastinate all the time on doing their exercises because it's the same exercises, basically. It's just because they have a different view.
Yeah. And so that's why I find, at one point in your book, you say, the questions at the end of the book is one of them is, isn't this just common sense? Right? But it clearly isn't just common sense because common sense isn't something we have a methodological view on or an approach. We don't have an approach where we say, okay, this is what I'm going to do if I get into a situation where I'm clearly being affected adversely by my own emotion response. So how would you, you've countered it in your book, but how would you counter it by if someone says, hey, sounds like common sense, why do you have to write a book about it?
Yeah, and the answer is it's sort of uncommon sense. There are a few things about that. One is that you could say, well, there's no reason to be anxious, there's no reason to be depressed. That may be common sense, but most people don't know how to get to that end of not making themselves anxious and not making themselves depressed. And most people don't realize that it's their thinking that's doing it. So when you listen to people talk, read a book, or you find it everywhere, people will say, I'm jealous because my wife had an
Mhm.
affair,
Mhm.
or I'm anxious because I have a big project and the deadline is approaching very quickly.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
but it's our thinking, as I said, that causes those emotions. And when we have disturbed emotions, that comes from a particular type of thinking, and
Mm.
that's thinking in terms of demands:
Yes.
must, should, supposed tos, have tos, escalating our reasonable preferences, rational preferences, into irrational musts and shoulds, laws of the universe.
Yeah.
And there are three, yes, we can say
No,
something.
no, I was going to say, yeah, that's certainly something I think as you get older, hopefully, a person realizes that the word deserve is usually not so great for either negative or positive reasons.
Right, right. Yes, yes. And there are three main demands that people have that cause emotional problems. The first one is a demand on oneself, and that takes the form of because I prefer to, I absolutely must
Mm.
do well and get approval. And if I don't, I'm no good.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that leads to anxiety and depression.
Hmm. Yes, I mean, this is something I think I had to realize early in my life, at least on a superficial level, because I was studying Japanese when I was 17 years old. And it's very, very difficult language. It's very stressful. Uh, and I was working at the same time, and it was emotionally, I was going through very big turmoil. And I was 17 years old. So there's that as well. Imagine trying to date in a language you've just started to learn, right? It was very, very difficult. And I also had crushing anxiety growing up as a teenager. I skipped all of middle school because I couldn't, for me, it was school felt like prison and I can't go. Felt like locked into that emotional feeling of doom and dread that I have to go there all the time. And as I grew up in my teenage years, and I realized I have to make decisions on my future, and I realized I have to finish school early, so I kind of did. That's a long story. Then I would try to go to Japan, which seems like the completely opposite of what you'd expect someone who has like crippling anxiety to do. But I think the reason mentally why I was able to do it was because I had made the decision to put the anxiety to the side because I'm gaining so much, right? I'm gaining whatever choices I've made, whatever the reasons I had to go. Those were my goals, right? No longer how am I going to feel, no longer avoiding feeling a certain way, right? My rationale was no longer, is this going to feel like a prison or is it going to feel bad? Because obviously going to Japan is not going to be easy. So I went in realizing and accepting that I was going to have difficulty. But I hadn't worked yet at that point. So when I got to Japan, and I had all this, I mean, we went through some financial difficulty in my family, and I had to work a fair bit while studying Japanese full time. And that's when I realized my anxiety about school was far less potent than my anxiety about work, right? The work anxiety was very difficult to get over, and it took me a very long time. And it required me to very, very carefully examine why it is or what starts my emotional process of anxiety and panics. Uh, because if you're working with people, you don't have the luxury of saying, oh, just give me like 10 minutes. I want to go outside, take a smoke or whatever. You can't do that. So that pressure in itself, as I realized, caused me to worry about the pressure and buckling under the pressure. Uh, and where in fact, I love speaking to people. I love social contact, and I can deal with an enormous amount of pressure in social situations. I don't get anxiety speaking in front of people. I had the anxiety of worrying about my fear and that it might cause me to stumble in front of people. And this is the secondary emotion.
Yeah,
Oh, oh,
secondary disturbance. You're
yes.
anxious about being anxious. You have a must about a must. I must not be anxious. So you double the anxiety. Right.
Yes. And
And
that's,
and that, and as I was mentioning, that that's part of must number one, a demand
mhm,
on oneself.
yes,
Yeah,
should, musts, and I'd like to add deserves,
yeah.
because people would say, oh, I deserve a holiday, or then the opposite end of the spectrum, they'd say, oh, they deserve what came to them. And that was always very intriguing for me, that kind of thinking, because if you say that person deserved what came to them, there's a lot loaded in that statement where you're obfuscating it with clearly an emotional, like a straw man, saying, "Oh, it's a good thing this is happening," but there's rationale in there internally, which I don't think
Mhm.
many people go through. And then there's also with yourself, you say, "Oh, I deserve that extra slice of cake," or "I deserve," when it comes to overeating or over exercising, right? I deserve this punishment, or "I deserve the pain," of exercise, which it can happen. And when it comes to professional problems, um, when it comes to dealing with, as I like to call it, the clash of the rationale, the clash of morals and consciousness, and conscientiousness, um, where we have two people who are rational at work. Let's say they're journalists or economists or historians, whatever it may be. The job generally requires them to be rational, um, but there's an issue like the one in the Middle East right now with Hamas and Israel, where both sides have histories of beliefs, histories of emotional responses to whichever side, as it were, whether they believe they have a side or not. There's always a side to an argument. Uh, they will come to it with their own um, loaded guns, with their own baggage, and that has gotten in the way of a lot of healthy debate, healthy debate. Because there's, anger, people will say, oh, use your anger, it can give you energy and all this stuff. But as you say in the book, anger isn't necessarily a good thing to be using. Um, it can't be beneficial. And in this case, I'd like to ask you, when a person has a debate, like on these topics, which always becomes emotional because it's a deadly serious topic, um, without having to stop the conversation, how could you either deal with it as you go forth using something like the 3-minute exercise? So while someone's speaking, or you feel like you're starting to get angry, you're getting hurt emotionally, um, how or what would your advice be for people debating or speaking with colleagues or with friends or whomever they may be, how you can stop or effectively limit I would like to say, negative emotional response you'd have from impacting your rational thinking during a debate or conversation?
Yeah. And the answer is it's too late when you're in the midst of a
Hmm.
situation, you start to get angry. What I teach my clients is to practice questioning, challenging, and uprooting their anger on their anger philosophy,
Mm.
because as I was saying, your emotions come from your thinking, from a philosophy, from a perspective. So if you're going to change your perspective, that takes practice.
Mm.
It's not only understanding that it comes from demands, but it's practicing questioning and uprooting your demands and showing yourself there's no reason anyone has to think the way I
Hmm.
want them to think. There's no reason they have to, although it would be lovely if we all agreed, but they don't have to see it my way.
Yeah.
And even if it seems to me their way of seeing it is totally off, they have a right to be totally off in their thinking, because all this means about them, if their thinking is off, is they're imperfect humans who act imperfectly, not bad people.
Yeah.
So I teach unconditional self-acceptance, and in this case, unconditional other acceptance, accepting other people the way they are, uh,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what, whether you like them or dislike them. And that doesn't mean necessarily agreeing with them. It just means accepting the fact that this is a reality. Reality is reality, not the way I want it
Yeah.
to be. And the more you get yourself angry about someone who's arguing with you, the more you just eat yourself up
Mm.
inside, tend to cloud your thinking and make things worse for yourself.
Yeah.
So the answer to your question, Danny, just to go back to that, is it's really a process of questioning, challenging, and changing your thinking on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And I teach exercises, which I call 3-minute exercises, where you can write out your irrational beliefs, write out the situations where you might get angry and your emotional disturbance, and question your demands. Why must this person see that way? And you show yourself in many ways there's no reason he must. It would be
Yeah.
lovely, but he doesn't have to. I don't run the universe. I don't control him. I don't like him thinking that way and disagreeing with me, but I can stand what I don't like.
Yeah.
And disturbing myself about it, getting myself angry, doesn't help and only makes things worse. So my clients write that out regularly, once a day, twice a day,
Yeah.
once every other day. And the more they write it out, the more they get a new way of thinking in their brain, thinking without demands, without musts and shoulds, thinking with just preferences.
Yeah.
Uh,
Thinking back on, I've done lots of sports in my life, and in kickboxing or rugby or whatever, you have muscle memory. Well, that's what we like to term it. I mean, really, it's a nervous system thing and memory as well. But you have to practice before you do something dangerous. Not just practice, but you have to make it something that you're going to do in a stressful situation. You have to be comfortable with that mental mentality. You have to be comfortable with being calm and having the preparation. Right? You can't put on armor during a battle. You can't go to a battle and say, yeah, I'm going to fight these guys. Okay, now I'm going to get my shield and I'm going to tie
yeah,
my
right. Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like saying, what do you do when you're in the ring with someone and they start punching you? Well, it's too late.
Too late.
You have been practicing that for months and months and months and months before you get in the ring. So it's the same thing with this.
Yeah, there's also another aspect where it comes to fighting, I think is very important because in fighting you have to keep it cool. Even sparring, it doesn't really matter because everyone has a different response. No matter how much someone can tell you how it will feel being punched in the face, or how it will feel being locked in a cage or in a ring or whatever, in a debate, it's no different there. The issue is a mental one. It's always a mental one. The biggest issue is yourself. So if you get punched in the face, some people, your first fear is, I'm going to look disfigured. And that thought will paralyze you. It will paralyze you.
Actually,
Even,
that thought won't paralyze you. What'll paralyze you is I'm going to
yes,
look figured. That would be awful, terrible, and
yes,
horrible. I couldn't stand that. So that's the thinking. So again, and you illustrate how easy it is to fall into that trap of thinking that the situation in this case
yes,
is figured, leads to your anxiety.
yes.
Uh,
And
but
yeah,
it's your thinking about that.
and it's one of those things where uh, you have to prepare, and usually preparing means debating, right? In this case, we are debating, um, having conversations which are more formal with people you're very much allied with. When I say allied, I mean people who think like you. Discussing small problems, but in a debated fashion. Being like, no, you know, I think business cars should be bleached white. They shouldn't be, the champagne or whatever cream. Um, why and why not? Because we have deep beliefs about even things like color of paper or texture, and we can get heated because we have not only, as you say, it's not because we have a disagreement, but there's a underlying reason. Let's say even if it's something simple like how do you say tomato or is it tomato? Right? I mean, this is it's famous. There's even like a joke about it because people do get heated about these things, and that is something that's fascinating that we can get heated about something so small. So imagine then the thinking goes, imagine then the situation's bigger. We have life and death situations. How much more it's going to impact me and the other person now, right?
And how much more you can upset yourself about it with your irrational thinking about it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it goes um, very far to explain how people can get caught in what first appears to be something very pleasant, and then very quickly, it can devolve into a feeling of panic and rage and anger and sadness. All of these things can happen, especially when it concerns friends and loved ones, because those are the people we deeply care about the relationships, and that's what causes a lot of the strain internally. You care about this person's feelings, you care about how they feel about you care about your relationship going ahead, you care about them seeing things the correct way, and these will set the musts and shoulds. of your own emotional,
They don't
interpretation.
set the musts and shoulds. You
Yes.
escalate your caring into musts and shoulds. So the
Mhm.
good news is you're in control of your thinking. It's not the situations, and you could practice
Yeah.
changing your thinking.
Yeah. And that's where the 3 minute exercises come in. I'm definitely going to be introducing this into my daily routine because I deal with my children, three boys, very different personalities. And, one is a very willful boy. He's just, it doesn't matter. You can't punish him. You can't reward him to change his behavior because you see for him, it's an internal conflict. And as a parent, it's very useful for me because I can see how for him, it's an internal process. And it allows me to have a mirror for myself and think, well, it's an internal process for everyone, right? It's an internal process for everyone. When
Right.
I look at the other boys seem so graceful and all these different things, but that's also an internal process. When something bad happens, or you say, "Please say sorry," you can see this like 1 second delay where he thinks about it and then he apologizes. And for my other boy, you can see he thinks about it, then gets stuck. He gets stuck. And saying sorry, because we have to say sorry in life, right? We're all flawed humans. Every single one of us, we're all flawed. We're all sinful. As a Christian, it's one of the basic beliefs that every human is sinful. You have to accept this. We have to be humble in our approach because, uh, even if you think, oh, I've got to help you, really, there's things about yourself you can help even before then. So practicing these things, like my children, I have them practice. How do you feel right now? What specifically? What happened right now? You feel angry. You know, what emotion do you feel? Angry, sad, worried? You know, um, and then ask, is it about me? Is it about you? Because it's always about yourself. But as a kid, you're trying to guide them into thinking
Actually, it's not
about,
always about yourself. When,
yeah.
as I was started to say earlier, Danny, there are three main musts, and only the first one is about yourself, and
Mhm.
that's a form of I must do well and get approval. If I don't, I'm no good. But the second must is a demand on others, which leads to anger, resentment, hostility,
Yeah.
and that's not about yourself. That's about the other person.
Mhm.
You should treat me fairly,
Yeah.
kindly, and nicely. And if you don't, you're no good. Uh,
Mhm.
so, so that's about the other person. And then the third must is a demand on the conditions of one's life. It's an impersonal demand. It's not a demand on oneself or others, but on life. My life must be fair,
Mhm.
easy, and hassle free. Um, my life should work out the way I want it to. Those kinds of things.
Mhm.
So those two areas are musts about things outside of yourself.
Yeah, and again, going to the things you need to prepare for. So let's say the goal for someone is I want to have a debate, or I want to talk to people, I want to talk to people about this conflict in the Middle East, this war that's going on. I'd like to hash out the differences. And the to achieve that goal, you have to prepare, you have to practice, you have to get things ready. And a lot of that, I think, is of course, we all neglect it. Not all of us, but certainly I do. I guess most people do as well. Their own emotional responses. Preparing yourself adequately to understand that what your goals are, because the goals we can lose sight of our goals during a debate or during an argument because our goals are, why do we want to convince this person? Why? Why? Is it because we care about their opinion? Is it because we care about other people's opinion? Is it because we care about the world in the general rule? Is it because we want to minimize, say, in the Middle East deaths, or is it because we want to maximize outcomes in the long run? Because these are different. These are, opposing goals a lot of the time. Um, and preparing yourself for that.
Which are the opposing goals? All the goals you mentioned seem like they coincide, coexist with each
Yeah.
other.
For example, there might be temporary deaths. Let's say a SWAT team goes into a building to get the hostages out. That's the temporary goal. First is to save lives, to stop the
Yeah.
person from taking hostages. But there's also a longer term goal of deterrence, for example. That's like a longer term goal where you don't want people to die now, but we also don't want there to be a precedent set where we say, okay, we allow something now, and this is where the world must conform to my goal kind of issue comes in, where the belief of deterrence is, I think, is correct as it is. It leads to a lot of internal strife, which then becomes external, or you believe, no, 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 we must have deterrence, absolutely must, you know. And as true as it may be, much like the children need to have discipline, they need to learn how to be disciplined and going outside, listen to instructions. As a parent, it's very obvious when I get incredibly frustrated about, this one little thing. Like, oh, no, no, you must brush your teeth, or you must learn how to brush your teeth. You're not doing it right. And you can get so caught up on one detail, even if it's an important detail in the long run. But you can sacrifice your well-being and the other person's well-being by emphasizing so much on that one thing. So this is why I say there is sometimes in conflict, especially with big issues like this, is that we want, let's say someone just says, I just want everyone to stop fighting, right? That's an admirable goal. Except if you think in a long-term hoop, if both sides say, okay, we're putting our guns down, in that case, I'll say, let's say Israel put their guns down. No, IDF says we're disarming, we're going to have peace. It's an admirable goal, but in the long term, it'll cause more bloodshed because they will be attacked, right? This is just the situation of it. So it'll minimize the temporary deaths very quickly. People will stop dying from being attacked in a war, but the longer term goals will be unsustainable, where also the feelings of will you be making people feel better? Will you be keeping them safe in the short term or long term? So the issues then, I think, the worries come politically, right? So the political worries are a long-term trajectory of a country, over a home. And this is another issue, right? Whether, in this case, Jewish people should have a home in Israel, in that area around Jerusalem. And there's so many other issues involved in that. Some would say yes, and some would say no. One side would say because Israelis will keep it safe, right? If that's even from a pragmatic standpoint, I think that's one aspect. But then the other side will say no. But just the presence of Jews in Jerusalem causes conflict, and both are correct in their own ways. And those are the things which I feel myself having to prepare for, because it's not just a personal political philosophy debate. It's no longer just oh, I'm a socialist or I'm a capitalist or, whatever it may be. It becomes longer term goals for the whole society become really, really personally entangled. And this is something I want to ask you about. Looking back at the 20th century, right? It's the most bloody century we've probably ever had, for sure, in human history. It seems to me that this will be a very muddled description, but please feel free to comment later or interrupt whenever you want. External or national or ideological or philosophical problems get injected into your own behavior. So people who otherwise wouldn't be angry or murderous or, these kind of things somehow fall into doing something which they know is wrong. This is, say, Europe in the early 20th century was crazy. And I doubt the Maoists or the Stalinists ever thought, oh, murdering a bunch of our own people is a good idea. But it kind of happened, right? Their ideology then said, oh, no, 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 okay, the world has to be this way. I'm going for this utopia or this situation. And I don't think when they started out thought that'll have to override everything else and everyone must die or else this won't come into fruition. So doing like a 3-minute exercise, I wonder if people had been more conscientious of their own thinking beforehand, preparing themselves to debate. For example, there's lots of public debate at the time. If humans would have been less violent at the time, because, as much as there's a long-term goal, how we behave, as you mentioned, is an internal thinking process, right? It's how you set these standards for yourself. And the standards themselves can set our behaviors, obviously. No, no, no. We can't have any debate about the subject because it's so important. So my question is, much like in the 20th century, we had a lot of bloodshed and a lot of clearly bad situation. Right now, there's a big potential for not only bloodshed, but actual exodus of people, one side or the other, or some people say there's no side, but for example, say on the Jewish side, there's the risk of losing the Jewish home, right? Whether it's a religious home or a cultural home, or for, the ethnicity of, whoever believes that they should be there. Uh, so how would you prepare yourself in a situation where the debate leads to potential death and destruction, and you're part of a situation which is bigger than you, but at the same time your part plays a big part in it because you have to try and convince people, or you feel you have to convince people, right? So how would you prepare for not so much personal relationships, but um, being able to uh, keep rational during a debate about stuff which is deadly?
Yeah, well, the way to do it is to stay rational is to look for what might keep you from staying rational. And that gets back to looking at your irrational beliefs, your demands, your musts and shoulds,
Mhm.
such as you mentioned, I must convince this person. And that's not going to help. That'll tend to cloud your thinking, make it more difficult, and probably alienate the other person
Yes,
and
very
be
quickly.
less likely to convince the other person. So the way to prepare is practice uprooting your musts and shoulds and convincing yourself, I don't have to convince this person. That's my goal. That would be
Mhm.
wonderful. But if I don't, I don't. The best I can do is try with a cool head, and maybe it will come to a good solution. But again, that's not
Mhm.
going to happen one time. As soon as you get in the
Mhm.
ring, you start practicing, but you practice on a regular basis
Yeah.
again and again and again. Um, so that would be my advice.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, thinking about the preparation for that kind of event, it's something we don't generally prepare for, because in all political ideology, we're pretty much taught this is correct, the other side is wrong, and it's not really humans in general. We're given tools in relationships in general to accept, we can have differences and all these different problems, but when it comes to ideologies or political philosophy, there's a lot of absolutes. Society must be like this, society must be like that. And putting aside whether it should or should not be, the internal process to deal with the anxiety or the fear and anger and all the different sadness thing that comes out of it, I'd like to think about your A through F, your A, B, C, D, and F, A, C, D, and F, right? So the activating event in this would be not, Jake doesn't admire me, or, something like that. But
In this case, it would be Jake disagrees with me.
Yes. So Jake disagrees with me, right? And of course, your belief then is obviously that he must agree with me,
Right.
right? That's the belief going in. And I think that's of course, as you mentioned, a good way to alienate the other person, because now they see, wait, well, maybe what the other person's belief is, no, 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 no. Maybe they didn't go in trying to convince you. They just came in saying, yeah, I want to discuss with my friend something. And now the friend is saying, no, you must be this way, which means I'm not the way I should be, in his opinion. Right?
Right.
Right. And it
And
causes
another
problems.
way to alienate the other person is assuming the other person doesn't have a must. They're
Mhm.
in it for a reasonable discussion and to express their views, learn from your views,
Yeah.
and come to some kind of solution, even if it's to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
Um,
And then,
so the must in that
and then
way
of course, the
also.
emotional consequences here, right? The emotional consequences, sadness, anger, feeling like you're betrayed, or feeling that someone's disloyal, or, feeling ashamed,
Yeah,
right? There's also
actually,
the feeling.
I'm betrayed is an A, an activating event,
Yeah, of
not
course. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, and it leads to other ones. So that's kind of my point, is that just getting into a debate with someone then leads to other, bad, vicious cycles, which all exacerbate the same kind of a debate, because we have it's not just like one line of problems. We then have, okay, so what if there's a feeling of like friendship, just betrayal in the friendship, betrayal professionally? You have all these other things which can run through your mind, which cause extra and, contributing factors, which make it a difficult process. And so I would assume you have to go through each one of the potentials, right? At that point, you think, okay, I'm going to debate my friends, I'm going to debate professionals who are with me in my work, I'm going to debate people I don't know. Um, what am I? What emotional responses could I have? So, which irrational beliefs could I have going in? For example, they must agree with me, and how would them not being that way, not meeting my expectations, how would that, or what what could cause then my rational behavior, basically my emotional consequence, anger or sadness, loneliness, right? If you're the only person with that opinion, you can really feel lonely because you think everyone must be like me and I'm not like them now, right? You're still a human. They're still your friends. There's no reason to feel lonely or sad necessarily. But as you say, it's that irrational belief which leads to that emotional consequence.
Yeah. Actually, there is a reason. I distinguish between two types of negative emotions. One is inappropriate or maladaptive negative emotions, like anger, depression, hurt, anxiety, and appropriate or adaptive negative emotions, such as sadness, disappointment,
Mm.
regret, frustration. And that comes from preferences. If I
Mhm.
prefer you agree with me, not you must, but I just prefer you agree with me. And if you don't, that's sad, that's unfortunate, then I will feel sad, and that's appropriate to the situation and to my goals in the situation. It's just when I make those preferences into a must, you must agree with me, that I get angry, depressed, or hurt. And those I would call inappropriate or maladaptive negative emotions.
Okay.
So do you
So
see the
let's,
difference there between appropriate and inappropriate negative emotions? They're
yeah,
all
yeah.
negative, but they're all appropriate to the situation.
Yeah. So let's continue with the ABC and then D. The next is disputing or questioning the irrational belief. So this will be before you get into debates and before you get into these issues. And you know how you're going to respond. I think everyone knows how they're going to respond and feel because we have experience. And you know, let's say I'm debating my friend, a friend of since I was a childhood, and I know he has a completely different, diametrically opposed opinion and belief, a very strong belief in something. And I know this is going to come up and I know we're going to debate. Um, so I know then that me thinking he must agree with me is going to cause problems. So the deed, disputing or questioning the rational belief, if a person really believes that they must believe this, they have a really strong found like opinion, then no, the person must fully agree. Uh, And even if you know that belief is going to cause problems, how do you work out the D part of it? How do you then say, okay, as much as I completely think and I believe wholeheartedly that he must, how do I stop that then from causing a problem?
Yeah, so that's D. D is disputing or questioning the irrational belief. And it means trying to be somewhat open minded and ask yourself, what is the evidence he absolutely has to agree
Mhm.
with me? Where is that etched in stone?
Yeah, yeah.
Someone has to agree with me. And then and if you think about it, there's no evidence he has
Mhm.
to. He's his own subjective human. So that leads to E, effective new thinking. He doesn't have to. I prefer he agree with me, but he doesn't have to. If he doesn't agree with me, it doesn't make him a bad or stupid
Yeah,
person. It just means he has his own way of looking at the subject. And I don't like him disagreeing with me, but I definitely can stand what I don't like.
yeah,
I've been disagreed with many times before, and I've survived, and I'll survive this time. And it's not his disagreement that causes my anger, but it's my irrational must thinking about that. And with much practice, before I get into the ring, uh, practicing changing my thinking again and again and again and again until I'm
Mhm.
ready to get into the ring.
Yeah. And then you have, the new feeling, right? And there's this, the new feeling part's interesting because, um, you mentioned it about sexual relationships. It's very, very, I think, very common to have a problem like this. That it causes, if it's disagreement or expectations of the other person, something we can all, I think, relate to. And when it comes to debating people, we all know what it's going to feel like. We'll know what the issue is going to be. We know the debate itself is the goal, not necessarily to completely convince the other person. And as much as we think that it's again one of those things. If you don't prepare emotionally, you don't think, okay, regardless of what this person thinks at the end of the day, I will respect him. He's my friend, he's my colleague or whatever. Um, no matter how crazy they may get their attacks, internalizing or understanding your own process with going through A through F here, I think it for me, just thinking about it, makes me realize I could understand their position better because I'm looking at my own position and how my own, um, beliefs and how my own irrational beliefs dictate my emotional response. So when I look at someone else now getting into the same situation, I can have more empathy on their situation, being like, well, they're probably attacking me because they have an irrational belief of their own, like everyone does. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and much like if you go to an animal that's just been run over by a car and it's still alive, a dog, would you expect it to not bite you or to not be scared? Right? This is an extreme example, but
Yeah.
really, I think we can see, that's very visual. We can look at that. But if we look at someone who's always our friend, we have issues being able to think, okay, this person can turn angry over, this debate. And so I think we're less prepared for this than we are for, oh, it's a wild animal. Clearly, the wild animal is going to, bite me. But that may lead to other fears, as you've mentioned before. And so that's the one of the A through F, thinking about your process. It's one of the interesting ones because I looked at your book and I found it very difficult to find my situation in your book because I read it and I thought, it could either be panic attacks is one of them, right? You can have a panic attack about something, you fear, well, in the middle of a conversation or a debate, you can, you know, get clenched up.
Actually,
Or
I do have a chapter on panic attacks.
yes, I mean, I'm saying I looked through it, but I thought, how does it, what's the exact issue that people want to work out? And of course, there's you know, vicious cycles in marriage. I can also see the similar thing in like relationships, professional relationships, and with personal relationships with friends. And of course, depression is very linked to this as well, as you've mentioned in your book as well, to hell and back. Um, and of course, the secondary disturbance, I think, was the most closest to this debate question, where you're getting upset about being upset or being fearful or whatever it may be, and not so much the debate itself, because we're used to having debates about important topics. For example, abortion, that's a very big debate we've had for a very long time in society. Um, and we get heated about it, but I think maybe because we feel less urgency, perhaps there's that sense of urgency in a debate about war. Um, but in terms of secondary disturbance, uh, well, what would you say is a good example of, you list examples in your book, but you've had obviously people who had political disagreements with colleagues or ideological differences, and this leads to what they think, maybe I'll lose this friendship, or or maybe I'll offend my boss, or whatever it may be, whatever the thing is. But they're more concerned about the fear itself, or the feeling of maybe being sad, or maybe the secondary thing, which is like a side product. Do you have obviously you do have experience about it, but do you have any experience about dealing with very deep political differences that cause problems, and how
In
generally
terms
would
of,
you?
yeah, in terms of secondary disturbance.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So a secondary disturbance again is first upsetting yourself about something. So let's say you're debating someone about politics, and you start to get angry. So there's a must there. This person
Mhm,
must agree with me. But then you notice you're starting to get angry,
mhm,
and you get anxious about that. I must not get angry. I must
mhm.
not get angry. So it's a must about a must. The first must is he must agree with me. The second must is I must not get angry. Uh, and so that's the secondary disturbance. So it means, again, acceptance, accept the fact that since you're an imperfect human, you might get angry or you might get anxious, and it's not the end of the world. And many people in that situation would make themselves angry or anxious, and there's no reason why you should be above the human condition. So,
Yeah.
so that would be a brief way to work on that.
Yeah. So I found that to be very useful in thinking about debates with people I respect, because um, I want to have interviews with a variety of people, and a lot of them I'm going to disagree with, specifically on this topic. But I'm also the kind of person who believes very strongly, this is a belief, I think it's a rational belief, that debate is important and that discussion is very important. And being able to identify differences, talk about the differences, but not attack each other's differences. Um, and for me, I think the biggest issue I've faced is certainly the secondary, um, disturbance, both in my professional life and my personal life. Um, and that's something I remember when I was a child, to just bring it back a bit. I actually had therapy when I was like 8 years old, about his age, and then 10 years old. And I found it to be completely useless, right? This was you know, what did you go through when you were 3 or 4 or 5? Your parents were divorced. I think most people have seen this. This is their impression of what a therapist is. This is what we all think, as ignorant people. This is what we're going to get. And I found it very useful to read your book because it's not like that, right? Uh, at all. Uh, and so that's the thing. When I had my childhood experiences, they said, this person basically asked me like, "Oh, tell me about yourself." I'm like, "Why? Why? Why? Why should I having a problem at school, right?" Um, and they said, "Oh, tell me about your parents." And I thought, okay, yeah, I have parents. And they had issues, that kind of thing. And they would constantly. It always felt like it was like leading the conversation, and then that made me feel very worried about how other people get therapy and whether it's actually useful for them or not. So this is a more broad question about therapy in general. Uh, when you have disagreements with other professionals in the same field as yours, right? So RABT is very different than other kinds of like Freudian, because I took psychology in high school as well. So I learned about a lot of this stuff. Um, and it's a very different approach. It is much more rational, frankly. REBT is a rational, very rational approach. Um, and I think in your daily life, you can identify it, you can see its effects of your thinking much more easily. Uh, when you've had debates, either personally, privately, or just thinking to yourself um, about the other kinds of very popular therapy, what's your opinion on them? Are they useful, helpful? Can they be helpful? Obviously, incidentally, or what do you think about them?
Yeah, so since our emotions come from our thinking, I think any type of therapy that isn't anchored in that idea and helping the client change their thinking is not going to be very helpful. Um,
Mhm.
Now, I mentioned Albert Ellis earlier, who changed the course of psychotherapy when it was more psychoanalytically oriented. But by changing the course of therapy, I mean that most therapists these days do a type of that therapy.
Mhm.
It's generally called cognitive behavior therapy, and that your emotions come from your thinking and helping clients change their thinking. So it's gratifying to see how things have come around and how more reasonable most therapists are. That doesn't mean they're entirely
Mhm.
reasonable because still lots of therapists do talk about childhood, but not
Yeah.
dwell on it obsessively like many
Mm.
years ago the psychoanalytically oriented therapists did.
So,
Another thing that I do that's different from a lot of therapists is I give homework assignments. And you
mhm.
mentioned one of the main ones, Danny, and that is writing out the ABCDEF,
Yeah.
practicing that on a regular basis. So I think that's an important thing. And I think more therapists could do that and give homework
Mm.
assignments. But I think some do, some of the cognitive behavior therapists do.
Yeah. And I have a question again, another one. This is about your history. So, when maybe you decided to become a psychologist, or how? So, I mean, this is like going to lead into a bunch of questions, but uh, why did you go the direction you did professionally?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is when I was 18, I had all these problems that we're talking about. I was anxious,
Yeah.
depressed, procrastinating. And fortunately, I discovered Albert Ellis. And so he helped me in the way we're discussing
Mm.
with identifying the must, changing the must. And it was so helpful. I thought it was a bright light in a dark
Mm.
field at that point. So I wanted to teach the same thing to people and help people who are struggling with their emotions. So
Mm.
that's how I decided.
All right. And so you decided, okay, he was like your role
He
model
was
or
my
your,
mentor, my
yeah.
role model. Yes.
So when you decided to study academically, so you went into university or wherever you ended up going, um, how were you able to find a curriculum or a course or a faculty that was in any way similar to what he taught, or was it largely competing methodology, or how did that work?
Yeah, it was largely competing methodology. So I knew that in order to graduate and get a PhD, it meant agreeing with the professors, not having arguments with them and
Yes.
criticizing them because they wouldn't take that too well.
Yeah.
So I told them what they wanted to hear in order to get my degree, and now I criticize what they wanted to hear.
And that's actually a very good segue into this topic where a lot of the time agreeing, not just agreeing to disagree, but agreeing on many topics is so much more helpful, I think. And just thinking about it now, um, there's so much to agree upon, even amongst very, very seemingly opposing views. And a lot of the time you have to work with people. I think that to me is probably my goal when it comes to political philosophy is it's in many cases so much better to just work with people, just continually work with people because you have to have faith that if your ideas are correct, if they are, uh, you will have a positive influence. And even if you don't, still working with people is still going to be a better option. Uh, and because you go to a university and let's say you're because I'm pro-Israel state. I'm pro Zionism, as it were, and that's a very unpopular opinion publicly now, for sure. Uh, but it doesn't mean that I become a recluse and I stop engaging in society or I don't go to universities. Which if at least I'm a young person watching this, right? Oh, I'm this. Should I go to Harvard or Columbia? Let's say the person's good academically. Oh, depending on the faculties there, either will or will not go. Uh, this is my opinion. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But I think in many ways, if you can approach it correctly, being in a situation where you're around people who are, say, openly hostile to your ideas is a great way to build your ability to espouse your ideas, to defend them, to practice. Because your roommates, your dorm mates, your professors, if they're vastly different than you're learning, I think, in many ways, especially if you're younger you're learning how to deal with these differences in a constructive
Yeah,
fashion.
yeah, if they're interested.
Yes, yes. If
They could decide you're an idiot. I don't want to have anything to do with you, and then that's not going to help build the relationship or work out mutual differences. But if you're dealing with people who want to discuss it and have somewhat of an open mind, then I think your approach is a very good one.
yeah, and I think it's an interesting one because all of us at some point have um, discrimination against us in one way or another. And of course, I'm not going to equivocate here because I'm not a black slave in America in the 1900s or something. That early 19th century or, something like that. That's an entirely different situation than what I find myself in, or what the Jewish people find themselves either in Israel or in American campuses, for example, right now. Where just being who you are, you know, can cause you problems, right? Let's say being gay in Nazi Germany, right? Um, Clearly it's a bad situation. And even if this person believes, I may be homosexual, but it doesn't mean I'm evil, and I shouldn't have to hide it. But there's, I think, this this debate, I think internally, whether your ideals and what you think people should accept are going to match with what people are actually going to accept, or what the results are going to be if you do argue about these things. Because as you mentioned, it depends on whether they are actually going to give an inch or accept you in the slightest, or whether they're going to utterly vilify you and destroy you professionally, destroy your academic career before it even gets started, for example. I'll just keep it on that. You know, um, and this is where I think thinking about these, how you're going to respond is very important because you realize other people have the same process, right? And just because someone is in a position of authority doesn't mean they're always going to be rational, or if they appear to be rational doesn't mean that they are. A lot of the time, it means you have entrenched beliefs, right? And they can get in the way of you, dealing with a student or someone who is supposed to be guided by you, because professors are supposed to mentor their students. Um, but as a student, even in a hostile environment, you can still uh, navigate it better, I think. Looking at having read your book, I think it would be very useful for students to read this book because they will be far more prepared to deal with, dealing with it like a hostile environment. Because if you're either too talented or you're not talented enough, university is going to be hostile. If you have ideas which compete with your professors and you're just some 19-year-old or 20-year-old or whatever, right? It'll cause problems. And
If
so,
you express your ideas, but as
yes.
I did, I just didn't express them, so I was able to get along with them and finally get out and then discuss what I really wanted to discuss.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. That was a thing I was going to ask you about with this professional, looking at your professional career. So you've answered my question. My question was going to be, so did you either A, attempt to reconcile your ideas with their ideas, or did you have a goal in mind saying, okay, I'm just going to pass this. I'm going to get through this academic process, get everything I need to be able to become a professional, and then help people because your goal is to be a professional that helps people. Right. So,
Yeah,
yeah, it's obviously
and
the latter.
yeah, yes, exactly. So it meant going through the process in order to get the product, which was
Hmm.
PhD, and then a more authoritarian position, so people were more likely to listen to what I had to say.
Yeah. So I'd like to end saying, uh, if you had uh, a 3-minute advertisement or commercial for your book for people who have this issue with debating, whether it doesn't matter what side they're on, um, how how would it help them in their personal professional lives when they have big ideological or political differences amongst people? How would reading this book and implementing your advice and homework, how would that help them?
Yeah, so good question, Danny. And it would help a number of ways. One is it would help you have the courage to put forth your ideas and be not make yourself anxious about doing that. So that would help make you more effective. And then it would help you um, avoid getting angry or hostile or resentful about people who have different ideas. And
Mhm.
then it would help you accept the fact that this is the way the human race is. Some people have very ignorant, stupid, or destructive ideas, and that's the way it is. And you better accept reality as the way it is before you can change it.
Mhm. Excellent. Very well put. I will put the links to in the description to your website where you talk about your book. And
By the way,
also,
Tom, by the way, Danny, I want to mention um, 3 minute therapy has been translated into Japanese.
okay.
I have a copy of that in Japanese.
Yes. I have the book. I read it back when we first spoke and I did the interview quite a
You have
while
it in
back.
Japanese?
Yes, the Japanese version as well.
Japanese. Okay.
Yeah, it's a very easy to read translation. I was very happy with it.
Okay.
It's not overly academic because academic Japanese is very difficult.
Yeah.
Um, so this is one of the reasons why I think for students it would be a great idea to be equipped to deal with. I like to say the modern university, but really, the 60s was probably no different in terms of clashing ideologies. And we can also see that the ideologies led society in a specific direction or, societies in specific directions as well. So ideas matter. They really do. And I think it's a shame that many people who are reasonable uh, use the idea of being reasonable to then not talk about the ideas, right?
Mhm.
Because, I don't want to cause problems. I don't want to cause fights. Now, of course, if it's your professor, you don't go and fight with your professor. That's just stupid. I would never recommend anyone do that.
Yeah.
Uh, but being equipped um, with the ability to deal with these things is very important, and it's something I think is very admirable. I'm very happy that you've decided very early in your life have a goal that you did, because it's helped many people in their lives. And would you ever consider, doing like another, like a follow-up, or do you think you've covered the topic perfectly in your book? How would you think about that?
Doing a follow-up book, you mean?
Yes,
Or a
of the
follow-up
3-minute
interview?
exercise.
I'm sorry, Danny, was it a follow-up book or a follow-up interview you asked about?
Follow-up book, actually.
Well, actually, I've done follow-up books. I've written 5 books.
Yes, yes.
So I think there's nothing else that I really could cover that I haven't covered. So probably no more books are in the offing. But as I mentioned, I do a podcast every week.
Yes.
I turn the light of REBT on other issues and other problems.
Yeah, I was going to try and segue into that, because I think that would be useful on a daily or a weekly basis to have something where you can listen and
Yeah, so have that. It's on Amazon. It's called 3-Minute Therapy Podcast.
Okay, so I'll have a link to that as well. Also, I'd love to have a follow-up interview again later to talk about more of these ideas. And also, I'd like to ask you about specific, instances where, back in your history, there were lots of issues politically that we went through since the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s up to now. And I can only imagine that each time people have a similar problem, bringing forth their ideas, thinking it's the end of the world, right? In their personal life, they shouldn't behave that way.
And
But
everyone must agree with me.
yeah. So I'm very happy we did the interview today. Thank you so much for taking your
Thank
time.
you. Thank you.